Hello, Sublation Media viewers and listeners. It's me again, Douglas Lane. In this Critical Cuts video, I'll try to convince you that you're suffering from an identity crisis. And I'll explain to you how it is that your television is and has been trying to give you information about this crisis for years, if only in code. Before I can explain what this identity crisis means and adequately inform you about your condition, I have to give you some bad news. Your identity is only a theory, as is everyone else's identity. No matter when or where you were born, your identity can be traced back to America in the 1950s. It was invented by the German psychoanalyst Erik Erikson while he was living in exile in the United States. Specifically, Erikson decided who you would be in a formal sense when he wrote an essay entitled The Problem of Ego Identity for the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association in 1956. However, while your identity was invented in the abstract in 1956, it only took a coherent shape when you were between the ages of 12 and 18. It was at this time that you began to ask yourself pertinent questions that would give you a sense of how you fit into the world. It was during this time that you decided what you wanted to do, what you wanted to accomplish with your life, and where you wanted to go. In fact, this period of identity formation was most likely experienced as a crisis. You most likely weren't sure what you wanted and weren't sure where you fit in. You almost surely had some role confusion, but by the time you graduated from high school, or sometime shortly after, you were on the other side of this crisis. You knew who you were. Your identity was in place. But here's some more bad news. The identity crisis you're in now isn't the same as this first one. It isn't happening on a practical level, but is theoretical. The identity in crisis isn't the one you formed in high school, but is the one Erikson invented in the 1950s. And that's why your television is trying to communicate with you about it.
I was watching this Late Late Show. A lot of truth in the Late Late Show. They slip it through there. They figure nobody's watching, but...
Admittedly, to get the message, you have to be selective in your viewing habits, and you have to pay close attention. These days, there are so many different channels and streaming services that finding the message should be easier than ever, but the powers that be still try to hide it away from you. For instance, the most important program at the moment isn't on Netflix or HBO Max. It isn't on Amazon either, but on Apple TV. Apple TV may have one of the world's largest corporations backing it, but its viewership is 10 times smaller than Netflix, and unlike in the days of network television, it's impossible to know just how many people watch any given show. Take the show in question, Ben Stiller's program Severance. According to Stiller, they won't tell him how many people have seen it. Stiller said, "They don't tell you the numbers. It's really weird. So you get these graphs and charts, like I said, with peaks and valleys, but you don't know what the baseline is. I guess it could be like based on 100 people, or it could be like 200 million people. We don't know." While the exact reasons Apple TV executives won't reveal the total numbers of viewers isn't presently known, it seems likely that the number of viewers is low, and that this is being obscured in an effort to inflate the value of Apple TV and in an effort to maintain advertising revenue. If it is the case that only a few people are watching, then that's a shame, because Stiller's program, Severance, demonstrates why Erik Erikson's theory of identity is in crisis. In his 1956 essay, The Problem of Ego Identity, Erikson outlined the predetermined stages of identity formation and psychosocial development with a box chart of his own. In this chart, he demonstrated how a person navigates a process of identity formation from within a, quote, community of life cycles which depend on him as he depends on them, and which guide his drives as well as his sublimations with consistent feedback. However, in the television show Severance, we are shown a community of life cycles that not only fails to provide consistent and sensible feedback, but also requires its members to abandon their identities. In the program, the main characters work for a company called Lumen Industries, a company that has developed a psychosurgical procedure called Severance, wherein, through the mechanism of a computer chip implanted in the brain, employees are cut off from their sense of self, from their memories, and even from their own names.
Hello, my name is Mark S., and I have, of my own free accord, elected to undergo the procedure known as severance. I give consent to sever my memories between my work life and my personal life.
As we proceed, try to remember that Ben Stiller's streaming television program is no mere entertainment. Keep in mind what I said at the start. Your television is telling you something, imparting information.
You know about the suppressed transmission, of course. No? Ah, well.
In Eric Erickson's essay on ego identity, he spells out how each stage follows from the one that came before it. We pass through infancy and the trust versus mistrust phase, into early childhood with its autonomy versus shame and doubt, into the play age, the school age, adolescence, young adulthood, and then into adulthood. This adult stage is, according to Erickson, the domain of our occupational identity. It is defined by an antagonism between leadership polarization and authority diffusion. To achieve a successful occupational identity, we must become generative or productive rather than self-absorbed. However, according to the television show Severance, employees are today choosing to return to infancy at work. At Lumen Industries, the severed employees start their first day on the job after their managers tell them what their names are. They can remember nothing of their previous selves. They have no conscious identities. And the management strategies of Lumen take this psychological state of the employees into account. Further, management makes an effort to hold the employees in a state of arrested development. They make sure to breed mistrust, shame, doubt, guilt, and feelings of inferiority into the employees, while attempting to stave off the reckoning that is adolescence indefinitely. This is hardly surprising given the history of modern production and work, when one considers all the ways in which people have historically been transformed from individuals with inherent meaning in themselves into mere instruments to be deployed to service the machines of industry and capital. This not-so-new tendency to split off or alienate workers from their own generative capacities is not shocking. Those who would insist that we are all individuals with functional ego identities, as Erickson defined them in the 50s, are serving the ruling ideology of capitalist modernity. Today, the stages of development he outlined can only be understood as descriptions of a life lived in some half-imagined utopia. Consider his description of adulthood, or as we would put it in today's terms, of adulting. According to Bartleby Research, for Erickson, adulthood is a period that runs roughly from the age of 35 to the age of 65. It is a period when creative and meaningful work becomes a central focus. The tasks of this period are associated with the transmission of cultural values through the family and work, and the capacity to respond adequately to the role changes that occur in this period, changes brought on by, for example, children leaving home or the loss of elderly parents, are essential if one's life or identity is to continue to have meaning or exist at all. However, if these unavoidable adjustments do not occur, then one's middle age will become a period of stagnation and self-absorption. When one encounters Erikson's theory of human development, examines the stages one is meant to go through, the problems we're meant to overcome, and compares his blueprint for the good life to what seems possible in today's world defined by precarity, both at work and at home, it is easy to imagine that this ego psychologist and psychoanalyst, who died the same year that the crash test dummies had their one hit, is just another purveyor of the American dream. Still, just like the concept of ego identity, the notion of the American dream has two aspects. On the one hand, the American dream is a dream of wealth, of obtaining a lifestyle, 2 picket fences, a garage in the car, 2.4 kids, and a little dog named Checkers. But the American dream is also a dream for equality, for the overcoming of racial, ethnic, and religious differences. It is a dream of independence, self-direction, self-reliance, and self-responsibility. It was in the 50s that the American dream changed from a political vision aimed at achieving a democratic society composed of citizens bound together by the project of freedom into a dream of wealth based on conformity and homogeneity. It was in the 50s that our current consumer society was realized. This facsimile of a free society replaced what had been understood as the American dream. Erikson's theory of ego identity arose in the 1950s America too, but it was a work of a theorist born at the beginning of the 20th century in a Germany defined by the struggle for socialism. Erikson was a teenager undergoing his own formative identity crisis during the German Revolution of 1918 and 19. Further, as a German Jew living in exile, Erikson knew all too well what direction history was headed in. According to David Anderson in his dissertation, Erikson's Challenge to Modernity, the inventor of our identity always stressed that while the development of individual egos was essential for modern society, the significance of identity had to be based on communal functions which encouraged mature development. For Erikson, the rise of Nazism was a symptom of the failure of modernity to create conditions that could nurture individual identity. Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, his theory that an ego identity was formed during adolescence, were always aspirational or prescriptive rather than normative or descriptive. At base, Erikson's model was utopian. It was a blueprint for a future identity, not a model for what should be considered normal now. And as soon as his understanding hit the mainstream, so did a countercurrent of objections.
I was watching this Late Late Show. A lot of truth in the Late Late Show. They slip it through there. They figure nobody's watching, but...
Donahue, Billy Gray, and Lauren Chapin.
Songs that made the hit.
It takes different strokes, it takes baby without a
Pinch of salt and laughter too.
Again, according to Erikson, the formation of an ego identity is a process wherein an adolescent discovers where he or she belongs, or wants to belong, within the social order. But according to your television, the social order doesn't have any secure positions on offer. Our human institutions are constantly cracking up, and the only way to survive is to adapt, to suppress, to become small and malleable, a cog in a machine on antibiotics. For example, in 2009, the Zach Galifianakis indie vehicle Visioneers was released direct to video.
Jeffers Morning, Level 3 Visioneer, George Washington Winston Hammerman speaking.
Jeffers Morning, George. It's Charisma, level 4.
Morning. Like Ben Stiller's Severance, the film depicts a dystopian future wherein workers' psyches are dominated by a corporation. However, while the workers are split off from their inner private lives in Severance, in Visioneers, the workers are tasked with controlling their inner world by suppressing their literal dreams. If the workers fail to get a grip on their inner world, fail to deny their dissatisfaction with their lives and prospects, they risk spontaneous combustion.
Isn't this a wonderful day today?
In Visioneers, the protagonist, George Washington Winston Hammerman, played by Galifianakis, can't manage to keep his dreams at bay. He is haunted by nighttime visions wherein he is not just George Washington, but the George Washington. He dreams he is losing the Revolutionary War and must come up with a daring plan to overcome the British forces. In the film, Winston Hammerman fantasizes that he might somehow cross the Delaware. At the beginning of this communication, I told you that your identity was only a theory, and that the theory of your identity was in crisis. However, your television wants you to know that it might be possible to come up with a daring plan. While the theory of your identity is in crisis, it is not necessary that you abandon it. The steps of psychosocial development could still be relevant. You could still discover who you really are, or more precisely, who you want to be. But you will not be capable of doing it on your own. In order to realize your ego identity, you'll need to participate in a movement, a project, or perhaps a party that will empower not just you, but all the lost and regressed people. Perhaps together, we can create a society worth embracing and passing on to future generations. Your identity is in crisis. Realizing that fact is hopefully the first step towards becoming who you really want to be.